All right, everybody. So what's going on today is we're talking to James Darby. James used to work for a painting company, so we're going to learn something about how paint's made. Kind of the topic of today. Hopefully, we're going to talk about kits and stuff too, but and we're doing this on Saturday because I just chose to. So hopefully everybody likes the interview, and here's James.
Hello, YouTube. How you doing?
How's it going? So how long have you actually been in the hobby?
In the hobby, I started in the hobby first as a destructive kid who would tear up my uncle's model cars. And then I guess about 8 years old, I got into building models. I even have one of my first models here that was a snap up. But so ever since I was 8, and I'm 52, so but most of my, for the beginning years, it was sort of sporadic. I went into the military, and so there's a year or two where I didn't fool around with models, and then I would get back into it. So off and on since I was 8, but even lately, I had an accident several years ago, and that kind of put me out of building models. So, but I've had enough chair time to where I'm pretty familiar with building model cars. Or I've also messed around with armor stuff. I never got into airplanes, or ships, but I've done a lot of armor, and I've done a lot of model cars. The semi trucks and regular cars. And then here lately, I've been doing other things that's sort of related to the hobby. I'm not into trains, but I guess I'm good at fixing stuff. So I fix up a lot of trains for people, get them to run, or maybe recondition them, or I weather the cars so they look old. And here lately, my latest project, believe it or not, has been dummy rifles. I'm in a club where we do a lot of military reenactment with real vintage military vehicles, and a lot of times their resin firearms get a little rough, and I'll strip them and repaint them and try to make them look realistic.
Oh, okay. I was gonna ask what that was, but okay.
Well, I think you get it. Yeah. Well, imagine a resin model car or a resin spaceship or something. Imagine a life-sized rifle.
Yeah.
That's just made out of resin.
No. Like I get that, but like I can only imagine like 800 of you out on the field with actual rifles. Well, I'm sure someone would get shot.
Yes. Right? Yeah. Well, what's interesting, let me put in quotations here. Supposedly, these two rifles that I'm working on, they're M1 Grands. Supposedly, they came from Saving Private Ryan. They were props on that movie. Supposedly. They're not mine. I don't own them, but the guy said that's where they came from, and the guy's a really good guy, so I like to believe what he says, but I can't vouch for that. So I'm working on two real beat up resin rifles that supposedly came from the movie Saving Private Ryan, but he doesn't have the paperwork. Because usually when you have something from a movie,
okay. So I have a side question since you brought that up, right? How realistic do those guns actually look, or are they pretty fake? Sorry, I'm going on a tangent here, but it's a good question. Wait, that's a fake gun?
Yeah, see where this hand is, and it looks white?
Yeah.
That's resin. I don't know if I can get this to focus, but you see how I'll beat up now when we get close?
Oh yeah.
One of the things I have to fix here is this is the charging handle, or what represents the whole charging handle.
Mm-hmm.
And right here, there's supposed to be trying to do this backwards. There's supposed to be a finger loop here, a finger hook where your finger grabs and pulls it back, and you can see it's broke off.
Okay.
And if I get real, see, I'm hitting my lights. You can see what this is.
Okay. From
And
a
so
distance on the camera, it
to
does.
anyone who knows these things, these weigh like 10.5 pounds, right? And this is my pinky. Trust me, it's not that strong.
Yeah, no,
Okay, so we're talking something that's really, really light, you know.
No, that's
But
cool.
because they're so light, they break very easily, you know. And so they make them for a movie, and they use them, and they get, you know, junked out, or they get broken because it's listen. You hear how it's kind of hollow.
Okay.
So a real rifle doesn't sound like that. So no, I'm not some crazy political guy who's wanting to go around shooting people.
No, yeah.
This thing doesn't work, you know. It don't even open. It's just a solid piece of resin. Well, not solid. It's kind of hollow, but it's only resin. But so I do stuff like this, you know. Yeah, it's worse shape than it looks. But that's one of the things I do, and that's kind of an extended part of the hobby. You know, obviously it started with building plastic model cars. And then I got into armor because when I was in the military, guys knew I built model cars and asked me, can you build a replica of my Bradley or my Abrams? And, you know, they're in the same motor pool I am, so I can go and touch the real tank and touch the real Bradley and go, okay, you know, and look at it. And I can make a replica of it looking at the actual vehicle. And that's pretty cool. It's like the last gentleman you had on your last interview, he talked about he likes to build model semi-trucks. And he knows what they look like and how they should be because he drives one. He can touch one every day. And so when I was in the military and I built these military models, most of the kits I built, I could go to the motor pool and actually touch and know what they were and know what was different from the model to the actual vehicle. So that's how I got into building armor stuff. And I kind of got burnt out on armor because I wasn't really building it for myself and for fun. I was making replicas of actual vehicles for the people who, you know, were a part of that vehicle crew, who's a crew member. So that's why you don't see me with a lot of military stuff around.
So when you were doing that kind of stuff for the military guys, how weathered were you making those tanks, or were you just making them clean?
I would actually do how can I put this? A worn clean. Okay. So I would build them like they were clean and sitting in the motor pool, because, you know, when the vehicles would come out of the field, they would go through a wash rack and all this cleaning before they even came into the motor pool, because you didn't want mud and crap in the motor pool. But you could look at the vehicles and see the wear, where the paint would wear off, you know, or there might be a little bit of haze from, you know, not getting rinsed very well because everyone is in a rough. Most of the guys wanted them to be what I would call motor pool builds, you know, to look like they did in the motor pool, not all covered in mud and all this, because, you know, they had their little cartoon characters they would draw on the paint on the side, and if it was covered in mud, you wouldn't see it. So I really didn't put battlefield stuff on there. They didn't want that. They wanted it to be a motor pool looking vehicle, you know, where a good example is like on most of your tanks, on the fronts, there's this gritty substance that they put over the primer paint. They primer it, and then when it's still wet, they put this sticky stuff on there, and then they paint over that. So it's the sand color or the green color or whatever, but underneath that is a coarse grit, so you have traction when you're climbing on the tank. And most people don't know this or see it unless you get up to one and touch one. Well, your average model builder, how often have they been able to go to an M1 Abrams and walk up and touch it? You know, unless they've been in the military and that was their MOS. Because even in the military, you just don't go on a strange motor pool and touch military vehicles. You can get in trouble. You have to have a reason to be there, you know? And so one of the things is that paint, as people would climb on the vehicles, the paint would wear off and you'd see little black specks. And that was the top of that abrasive material that was right under the paint. You know, for those who've been in the military, one of the vehicles that's often seen quite a bit, you know, was the 2.5 ton deuce and a half trucks. And on the fenders, they did the same thing. So you actually would stand on the fenders a lot to work on the vehicle, or you'd set or drag things across. And eventually you would see where the coarseness that was under the paint would wear off the top, and you'd have that little black speckle that wear. So you would have that perfect color. It would be a little different.
Yeah. And that's really cool, because a lot of people probably didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's like Humvees. You know, in the early days of Humvees back in the 80s, the paint from the factory peeled off. Just literally peeled off because it didn't stick to the aluminum. They didn't use the right kind of paint or primer or something. And it was a big problem in Germany. You have these Humvees going around in woodland camouflage, and then right behind the wheel well is a big yellow splotch of aluminum, because the aluminum wasn't the bright, shiny soda can aluminum we're used to. It was a yellowish color. And I guess that was from the primer they used so the paint would stick. That fell off. Right.
So it was like using the Vallejo primer, is what you're saying?
You know, I don't know what kind of primer they use, but yeah, you know, if you use a primer, I don't think I've used a Vallejo primer, to be honest with you. But yeah, you know, and we'll get into that when we talk more about how paint is made and how it reacts and what it's designed for.
So everybody can probably see your stash behind you. What's the coolest thing you have back there?
Well, the coolest stuff is in a different room.
Oh,
because there's no sunlight, and I don't have insects. Anytime you have a window and a door, you know, I got a door, you know, in front of me that you can't see.
Okay.
So I can get insects and spiders in here. And so my least valuable kits, or the ones that I think is least valuable, is in here, and my collector kits are stashed somewhere else. But I guess looking here, the most valuable kits I have in this room, I don't know if you can see them, like right at the top of my head, right in there, I have a complete set of the Tri-5 Rebel kits, you know, where the doors and trunk all open, from 1974. So those kits, there's 6 of them right above my head. Those are all from 74. They're all sealed, and they're the original Rebel Tri-5 series that have the opening doors and trunks, you know, and they actually have a series number on them. And I know it's so you have the 55, 56, and 57 Chevys. And so, you know, I guess they call it Tri-5 because of the 50s. The 3 most popular 50s cars was a 55, 56, and 57.
No, that's really, really cool. Yeah. You don't do Gundams or anything, right?
I haven't in a while. The last Gundam I did was a Dark Matter. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I guess people who are into Gundams are like, yeah, the Dark Matter guy, you know. I found it a little too time-consuming when it came to the way my mind thinks and trying to get into perfection. But I built one and I lit them up, you know, where I had lights, you know, the little SMD lights that are smaller than a pinhead.
Okay.
I lit up his wings and his all that, so it was cool. It didn't articulate, but you know, you could run a magnet behind him and he would light up. Run it again, the magnet, his certain lights would flash. It was cool, you know. Run it again and the lights would change to a different color. But that one took me almost a year to finish, and I tried to video that, but when you don't know what you're doing, or it's an all new kit, something different, and you're trying to do a video of something you really don't know what you're talking about, but you're figuring it out. I mean, that video would have been, 3 months long because it took a year to finish. But
Oh wow, that's cool.
well, because the directions were in, I guess, Japanese, and somebody had turned me on to a website where they actually translated the directions, so that was helpful. But I don't know. There was like, for a thing that stood about 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall, there were 2,000 pieces. Trying to figure out how it goes together because the directions just, to me, weren't all that great. And I'm sure there's people listening saying, "Well, you must be an idiot."
I don't know about that.
But and I still have a few I haven't touched, but I do plan on putting them together. I guess the earliest thing building models like Gundam kits is in the early 90s. Robotech was a big thing in the United States.
Wait. That was the jet things that
Yeah.
Okay.
Robotech was really big in Japan, and then they changed. You can see the same episode in Japanese. I mean, and then they just took and redid the voices, put voiceovers, and then they sent it to the States. So Robotech was like in the 80s really popular in Japan, and it came over to the States in the late 80s, early 90s, like 80, 89, and my opinion, Robotech is what led to cartoons like the Transformers and stuff. I think Robotech was...
No, wait a minute. That Transformers is before that, right?
I don't know. So,
I don't know either. I mean,
I do know. I guess if you look at the history of Robotech in Japan, it was a lot earlier than it came out in the States. And I don't know how. I don't even know if the Transformers started in the States or if it started over there.
No, over there.
Yeah. So one of the two came first, but it was I guess.
I'm sure someone will tell us in the comments.
I think probably the Transformers was geared more towards children.
I'm an 80s kid, so that's why I'm into the Transformers.
And then if you watch Robotech, it's more of a cartoon adult drama where there's romance and all this stuff, and relationship issues, which you don't have that in Transformers.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So I think Robotech was more for the older generations.
Gotcha.
Than the little guys.
Yeah, I'm an 80s kid, so that's why
Me too.
I know more about Transformers.
Yeah,
but
the three most popular television cartoon vehicles in my life was number one, the Scooby-Doo van.
Yeah.
I love that van. But and I say that one first because when I was just a little guy and I didn't understand what cars were, I knew what the Scooby-Doo van was. And then I would say, what would be the second? Speed buggy.
Wait,
I'm
what?
being honest. Everyone's going to say other stuff, but I want to tell you. Speed buggy.
Oh, buggy. Okay.
And that's kind of a 70s cartoon that bled off into the 80s, but it was of a dune buggy that actually was alive. See, the Scooby-Doo van was just a van with characters that would ride in it. Speed buggy was actually alive.
Oh, okay.
And was its own character. So, yeah, I'm telling my age. You guys can laugh at me if anyone's watching.
There's three watching, but
three, yeah. So Speed Buggy was pretty cool, and I guess Speed Racer was out, but I guess it didn't air where I was at. And you also have to realize, I grew up with 3 channels on the TV. Sometimes, depending on the time of day and the weather, sometimes we would get the video and no sound, and other times we get sound and no video. So, and then we also got the truckers on their CBs going by talking, bleeding over the television.
Oh yeah, that's
so. The Scooby-Doo Snap Kit is an awesome kit.
Yeah, my son's built that too.
Yeah, and so the last Acme show that actually had physical participation, that year and the year before, someone had taken the Scooby-Doo van. They won it 2 years in a row with the same vehicle. But they actually took a Scooby-Doo van and customized it, and it won Best of Show. It was just a wicked-looking van. So you can make the Scooby van really cool if you've got the imagination.
No, and that's the cool thing with some of those kits.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Well, you know, I keep saying this, you know, model builders always say, I'm going to do this and I have a plan, and we never get to it. You know, I'm using myself an example. I got a whole shelf back here of nothing but movie or television show related kits. You know, I showed you one the other day. I have it stashed aside just for you.
Thank you.
You could talk about that kid if you want, but I have
no, we're not, because
somebody else will be wanting.
Someone will try to
get
that from me. So
no,
then, that's not.
As you get older, you know, you start running into military vehicles, or not military, but other TV show things that interest you as a kid.
Yeah.
And so the next vehicle, believe it or not, wasn't a car. It was an airplane. And I'm not an airplane guy, but there was this show called the Black Sheep Squadron with Pappy Boyington and his crew, and they fly around in these F-4U Corsairs and dogfighting with the Japanese and all this. So that Navy F-4U Corsair to me was the most beautiful thing ever. You know, of course, I don't think so now, but back when I was a kid, that was cool. You know, and they would always show the same footage, this kind of like the Dukes of Hazzard. They show the same jump 100 times, but in a, you know,
yeah.
And they would always show these dog fights, and it was the same dog fights. They just kind of moved pieces of it around. But that was probably, you know, my first real, you know, vehicle, even though it's an aircraft that I was into. And then, of course, now we'll get to where everyone will agree. The General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard. You know, that was the cool car. But I don't know if that one was for, actually, I think the Batmobile came first. Because I remember watching the original TV series of Batman. And that car was the bomb. When it burst through the side of the mountain, the bushes would move. And he'd come out. Yeah, you know. I always wondered why he didn't just run over the Joker and you know, bounce the car a little bit over him. But, you know. So it's probably the Batmobile was first. Then the General Lee. And then, I don't know what other. And then you have the movie cars that was really popular, that I really liked. I had a thing for the Smokey and the Bandit car and the Smokey and the Bandit truck. And then you had BJ and the Bear. That was a TV show, and his truck.
Yeah.
You also had Moving On, but that truck didn't look as cool as BJ and the Bear, and Moving On didn't have a monkey. You know, but when you're a young person, the monkey is important. Okay. And then, you know, you had the 18 van. We don't want to talk too much about 18.
Yeah.
18 van, but you had that, you know.
Knight Rider.
That was pretty cool, but I think I was hitting the age where it's getting a little too far-fetched for me. But I really did like the shit. What was it? A Bison or a General? It was a GMC truck, I think. That was the black truck that hauled the trailer that Kit would park in. I could be wrong.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Think about that for a while. I think it was a General.
Yeah.
A GMC General, not a Bison, not a Chevrolet, because it had the stars. Yeah. So, you know, I like the TV shows, the movies with big trucks because I was a kid and big trucks are cool, you know. But yeah, you know, there's all sorts of Stingray. That was probably early 90s, maybe. The guy running around in a '63 vet. All sorts of.
And then you had the Viper TV show.
Yeah.
They came out for that.
Well, also in the '80s, when I was in high school, a show that was really cool was Miami Vice.
Okay.
And they had a Corvette dressed up to look like a Daytona Spider, or it was a kit car of a Daytona Spider on a Corvette chassis, but to us it was a Daytona Spider. It was black and sleek, and it was cool. And then he ended up with a Ferrari Testarossa or something after that. I don't know.
Well, no. The Ferrari was always in the show, right?
Well, I don't know. See,
but Tubbs had the vet that changed to something else. I don't remember.
Well, I think the black car was supposed to be a Daytona Spider, a Ferrari Daytona Spider. Okay, but I read later they actually used a kit car that was built on a Corvette frame, because you're talking a lot of money when you start buying real Ferraris and stuff.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I've got almost all the Batman stuff. The only stuff I don't have is the original TV show.
You don't have an original TV show Batmobile?
I don't.
Bipolar Lights?
I don't.
That's an awesome kit, man. You need to find it.
But here at the local shops, you see them and they're like $40-$50.
The last one I bought at a show for $5.
Oh, really?
Sealed and complete. The first one I bought was like $30 new when they first came out, and I was working on it. I was, it was before they had the light kit for it, and I was trying to figure out how to light it up and boring out the little beacon light so it'd work and everything. And I went to do something, and I was gone and out, and I came back, and my Shih Tzu puppies got a hold of it.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess they could do a cartoon episode where giant Shih Tzus come by and eat the Batmobile. And they could have filmed that, So I've never finished the build. And even though I got, I think, 2 of them, at least one complete kit. I think I got one. Yeah, I do. I haven't built it, I think the only TV show movie vehicle I built, and I don't have the model anymore, is I built the Sanford & Son truck, and I had to do some customizing on the model because it wasn't the right year, but with some tweaking, I can make it look right. Yeah. So I did the Sanford & Son truck, I don't know, 25 years ago or so. But yeah, that was another iconic TV show vehicle that no one thinks about. That and Rockford Files, the little, Pontiac Berlinette,
Yeah, I think Dirk just did
Did
that.
he? Yeah,
So,
that was a cool car, There was a lot of. I don't know how many Vanishing Point cars I built, because when I first saw the movie Vanishing Point, I thought it was the greatest movie ever.
No, that's the Challenger, right?
Yeah, it's a white Challenger. And there's 2 movies. There was a movie that came out in the theaters, and then years later they did a for television movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ego guy or something. I guess he was better looking than the original guy who played Kowalski, but 2 totally different types. The storylines are different, but it was still a white Hemi Challenger flying across the desert. Yeah. And then, of course, speaking of flying across the desert, the movie Convoy with that big old black Mac with the rubber duck hood ornament, with Chris Christopherson. That was another iconic truck. You never heard of the movie Convoy?
That was the movie. I was thinking that was a TV show, but no, that was a movie.
No, it was a movie. Yeah. So we could be all day talking about movie cars and stuff.
True.
Next question.
I wanted to kind of talk about some of the kits you had too, because you've got a cool, unique stash, right? That's kind of why I went that direction first.
Yeah. So I have this stash. I have these that's not so much of a stash. I got my more rare kits that's harder to find. And then I have a military stash where I got a bunch of military. And then I have my semi trucks, you know, because I haven't built a semi in a while, but I used to do it all the time. In fact, if I rotate, you can see my next project is the new International TransStar. And look for a video in the future. But for those of you guys who may know a fellow YouTuber, Big Will Ryder, William Ryder, and another YouTuber, they don't put out a lot of videos. They're kind of like me. Every once in a while, they might do something, but we're more into the building aspect. But anyway, so William Ryder, myself, and Kel Gaither, we're going to do a buddy build, the three of us, and we're going to put together that TransStar.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Who know? Our goal hopefully is that we'll have them finished before Acme, you know, because we'll all three of us, we always go to Acme, you know, and I'll run into a few of the guys, at least one guy I know of that you've interviewed, I'll run into down there. But you know, we will hopefully we can get that done before that show. But yeah, I have all kinds of kits. You know, I hide the good ones because I don't want people sending me a message. How much do you want for that that car?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, my stash has helped out a few people, and when they needed a car for a certain project. I don't know if you've heard of him, but there's this gentleman, Marcus Cruz, and he.
Oh yeah.
He did a lot of articles in Scale Auto magazine, and he did one where he did that 68 Super B, that Dodge Corvette, where he built two of them. And so he was looking for the kit, but you know, one thing I have is a lot of kit knowledge, and I can tell you that, you know, roughly how many times the kit's been reissued and what colors they may have been molded in, and if they were, you know. Anyway, he was looking for the kit molded in really, you know, in that midnight blue metallic. And if you know anything about painting anything, especially if it's a dark color, is hard if you want to put lighter colors on top because they bleed through. So if you have something that's molded in red, you best paint it in red. You know, or if it's a dark color, you need to paint it a black or a really dark color. And so he had contacted me and asked me if I had one that I would sell. And I said, well, you know, we talked about what we want to do. And when I found out what he wanted to do, I said, well, I have, you know, a parts box that has enough to build 2 kits, but then there's a third body and a few extras, and they're all molded in white. So if you want to paint them, you can paint them whatever color you want without any issues. And I don't think at that time he realized that there was a version molded in white. So I sent it to him. You know, we made our deal, and it was I don't know, 6 months later maybe, I don't know. But eventually they were an article in Scale Auto, and although nobody cares, I can say, yeah, he got those kits for me, you know. But not that it matters, because I had nothing to do with this creativity and talent putting them together, you know. But I've been a source for a lot of guys trying to find those hard to find kits or something that's they're looking to build, you know.
No, I mean, that's really cool that you help out. That's really cool. That's not something you hear a lot of.
Well,
yeah.
You know, I'm 52, and so I'm not going to live forever. I've almost, you know, left this world a few times in my life already.
You mean you're not gonna put together all that department store behind you?
No, I wish. I got enough models that if I built one model car every 2 weeks, if I built 2 models a month, I will die before I finish them.
Yeah.
Honestly. And I can build a model in 24 hours. I've shown that on 24-hour group builds. But if I'm not hard pressed, or if I don't have a goal of finishing it within a specific time, it might take me months. Because most guys, when they in the hobby, they get a model car, or I'm assuming this, and they put it there and they start building it, and then they finish it. Me, I'll start on a model, something will come up, and by the time I get back down to it, I have to wipe away all the spider webs that's all over here, because it's no joke. I can leave something here for a week, come back, and there's spider webs everywhere. It kills me. But building model cars isn't my only hobby. I do other things.
Yeah,
that takes up my time as well. And even though I'm retired, you would think, oh, now that I'm retired, I can build all kinds of things. Man, I think I build less now than I did when I wasn't retired. It's crazy.
Well, yeah. But that's because now you have the energy to go out and do the other things you really want to do, right?
Yeah, or I think I have the energy. I still try to.
But you know what I mean. Like,
when you're old and fat, I guess, but a good example is a lot of people who know me, who may watch this. I'm really into military vehicles, and I do a lot of things that, how can I put it, showcase military veterans. Okay. I know you've had a few guys on here who talk about, building models for vets and getting vets. But when a guy from World War II has his 100th birthday, and you and a group of your buddies that have World War II Jeeps, and I got my truck, and we show up in front of his house on his birthday with all these military vehicles, it really touches them. They're like, somebody cares. And they get sentimental. Where do you think, when you see vintage military stuff in the trade?
Wait. Time out. Are you talking about like model cars or big things?
Big, real, put gas in it and drive down the road trucks, It
wasn't exactly clear. I wanted to make sure that
we're talking about the same thing. I would show you a picture of what I have, but when we kind of practiced this earlier, my, I got this, I'm thinking about getting rid of it, Manicam, and I could switch from what you see me here to a picture and all this stuff. I can move back and forth, and I'd show you a picture of my truck. But I have a real one-on-one Army truck.
Oh, that's cool, dude. That's really cool. And that's cool that you do those kind of things, because those guys have seen stuff in this world that I don't even want to think about. I'm
a veteran too.
So,
and the only reason why I ended up getting into a military vehicle, it's military vehicle preservation is how we like to call it, right? And I ran into this truck. I remember driving one when I was in the military. I remember driving one when I was in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Veterans have a fondness for the vehicles that they served in. We talk about veterans, but if you sit around a group of veterans, they like to talk about the vehicles they drove or rode in or worked around, because they're cool, or we think they're cool.
Yeah.
So, when you show up to an event that represents veterans, like a Memorial Day or Veterans Day, Memorial Day is for people for soldiers who have passed away while in service. You know what I'm saying? While in combat or while in service. A lot of people don't understand what the difference between a Memorial Day and a Veterans Day. Veterans Day is for all veterans. Okay, a lot veterans who are alive and veterans who served, retired, and then may have passed away. But Memorial Day is for those who died while in service.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be in war, because serving in peacetime, when I served in the military, I went in during peacetime and found out real quick the world isn't a peaceful place. And being a young guy, barely in his 20s, going to war was something scary, Yeah. But anyway.
No, that's really cool that you do that kind of stuff, dude. I'm sure those guys really appreciate those kind of events. But let's get on to the topic at hand, right?
Yes.
So I'm not going to say where you worked, but you worked for an automotive company, right? Automotive paint company? Or is it model related?
It was, how can I put this? So paint comes in many different stages. Okay, they don't just make it all in one spot and it's ready to sell. I worked for a company that made colorant that went into making paint that was used by many different brands. For example, most people have heard of House of Color. You know, here's a really old jar of House of Color paint. You know, this is a model car paint, but most people know it from watching those, you know, car shows on cable and everything where they build cars and put special paint jobs on them. So I actually made this orange, the colorant, but I didn't make the paint. You're like, well, what do you mean? When this paint is made that's in this jar, we would make it and put it in a 35-gallon canister. Now that canister was more money than your car costs. Your brand new today price is off the lot, and it was really thick. And then they would take it and they would mix it with their little magic juice and whatever, and then they would sell it. But still, even when you buy it from them, then you have to go buy other materials to thin it, to put it in an airbrush and all that. So paint actually goes through a huge process before it is ready for the customer. I guess a more simplistic explanation is when you go to your major home improvement stores to buy house paint, you pick out a color chip and they flip through a book, and so they get a base white, and then they get 3 or 4 different cans, and they put by weight a certain measurement of these different colors, and then they shake it up, and then that's your paint color. And so I basically made the colorant that would be used in making paint. Some of the colors didn't get, most of the time the colors that I made would just get thinned out and ran through a machine. We made John Deere green, and when we sent it off, that stuff was thick. You could poke your finger in it, pull your finger out, and have a huge glob on your finger and just small drips coming out. You know, or it wouldn't drip at all. It was that thick.
So my question for that, right, is does that help you knowing all that stuff to like thinning paint for like airbrushes and stuff? Or
you know, because so paint is not created equal.
No, absolutely not.
You can think of paint as an automobile in a sense. Not all cars are meant to do the same thing. Okay, so you got that Honda Civic that this kid is running around and delivering pizza, right? Take that same Honda Civic and put it on a Rubicon trail that Jeep Rubicon is going through without too many problems.
Okay.
And see how far you get through that trail with that low sitting Honda Civic. Honda Civic's great fuel mileage, great car. You take it off road and you're hurting. Now you try delivering pizzas in a Jeep Rubicon, in your wallet, you're going to be spending more money in gas than you are making and delivering pizza. So, you know, different things, you know, things are designed for different things. So a paint is pretty much a coating, and they're made to bond or to stick or to do something in a specific manner. For example, if you have a filing cabinet or like your microwave or your stove, and you know they're a color. Okay, so that's not paint, that's a coating. And I'm not saying it's a, you know, where powder coating where you see these guys spraying powder on something and heating it up. No, it's a coating, and it's specialized because they don't build their product then paint it. the metal is actually coated in that color before it's bent into shape. So you imagine taking a piece of metal and getting your rattle can paint, painting on it, and then bending that metal in sometimes even more than 90-degree bends. You know, it's going to flake and crack off, right?
Yeah.
Well, so they'll make a coating that when the steel coil is delivered to this place, it's cleaned. It goes through some sort of process, some machines where it sucks it through. They clean it, and then they coat it to either white, black, whatever color they choose. And then it gets rolled back into a coil, and then it gets delivered to, let's say, GE in Louisville or somewhere like that, and they cut it into the shapes they need. They bend it in all sorts of directions, and bam, there's your stove, your microwave. It's white or it's black or whatever colors people have in their houses, red. And, you know, it wasn't painted at the factory. The factory ordered their steel already coated with a color. And so that's a colorant, and that's like kind of a paint. But when we think of paint, we think of something that is an aerosol that we spray on something. You know? And so when you think of, like, you know, you can watch a lot of YouTube videos where these guys paint their model cars. And I even have a video where I airbrushed a model. Just, I didn't get into detail too much. But so model car paint, you know, like this. Tester's paint, you know, or one of my favorite rattle can model car paints is, you know, the Tester's Extreme Lacquer. You know, these paints were designed specifically to spray on styrene, specifically for painting models. So paints like this rattle can, if you watch your conditions and your cleanliness and everything, you can get a paint job that's outrageous. A good example is, you know, I don't know how many trophies I've won with this car because of the paint. And, you know, I'm trying to show this, but everything's backwards. That's a rattle can paint job, you know, and you wouldn't think so, but it's a paint designed for plastic models. Now, I'm not saying you could only use paint that's designed for plastic models, but to understand what paint will do and what it won't do will help you. So even if you get a paint that's designed specifically for whatever you're painting, they have a flash time, and they if you don't paint within a certain amount of time or use a specific time frame, you can run into problems because of the chemical composition of these paints, or any paint for that matter, unless it is an acrylic paint that comes out flat. But then even sometimes you'll get a weird discoloration, and we'll talk about some of that too. But all paint has some sort of solvent in it, whether it's an alcohol-based solvent like your acrylic paints, or if it's a more hot solvent like you would get in a lacquer or an enamel or something like that. Whenever a paint starts to dry.
Do you know the difference between the two of those?
Yeah, actually. So enamels is very old school. Your original paints, believe it or not, you know, if we get back way in history before Christ, okay, all your paint was an acrylic-based paint. Okay, it was some sort of water-based paint where they would take whatever they can find, that, you know, berries. What's funny is a lot of paint today is still based off of the same techniques that they made paint way back before Christ. Even if you look at women's makeup, it's a paint. They're painting their face with something so that you can't see the skin underneath. And back then they would use like pig's blood for your bases, and Revlon shouldn't have said that, but there are makeup manufacturers that still use, you know, blood from animals and things to make their makeup. you know. So when you look at an acrylic based paint, they used to, take, and I still do this trick. For example, you want a rust color, and you can go out to some of these really old cars, or if you have something that's been sitting outside and you have this dusty, rusty stuff on there, you can take that stuff, grind it down, mix it with something, and you have a rust color. So,
Wait. What do you mean grind it down? How are you grinding that down so it would make paint?
So a paint is all paint comes from some sort of pigment, unless it's a dye, but then most dyes come from a pigment. Pigments come from, for the most part, natural resources. Okay? They don't come from some taking chemicals and these chemicals make different colors. When you drink Kool-Aid, okay, what makes Kool-Aid taste the way it tastes has nothing to do with color. The coloring that is in there is some sort of natural ingredient that's been ground down into a fine powder, so that when it's mixed with something, then it will conform into a paste or a coating. And then you put in other things to make things stick. And so, in the early days, they actually would use blood. They would to make their paint stick, because the proteins would make, they would take flower petals, dry them out, and grind them down into a fine powder. Most of our like paint that we use nowadays comes from overseas, where they actually mine rocks that are a specific color. They grind these rocks into a fine powder. They get shipped to wherever. They're ground even more into a powder, and you have these huge sacks of a color. It's like having sacks of flour. Flour wasn't always flour. It was a seed ground into nothing. Ground fine. And you take this and you mix it with some sort of, substance that's wet. That will, so you can make an aerosol or make it spread, but then also with an agent that will make it bind, like grease. Cavemen used to take ashes from the fire, grind it up, mix it with some animal fat, and paint the caves, and they're there now.
Well, so, that was, but they were using charcoal and stuff.
But to get it to stay and stick, they would mix it with like an animal fat or something like that. And essentially that's what we do today, but just more high tech. We use chemicals because, chemistry has boomed in the last century or two. 200 years ago, you had chemistry, but nothing like it is today. And so, they can take those fine powders that's been, where it's rock that's been ground down, or maybe it's some sort of plant material. There's places they grow specific flowers specifically to be used as a pigment in making paint. A pollen. You ever get pollen on your finger and you try to wipe it off and that color stays there forever? You ever do that?
I've never done that. I don't get.
So it's funny, when we think of paint, we don't think about how it comes from a lot of natural resources, but don't think it's safe. But so when paint is made, you take the pigment wherever it came from, and we have what we call a recipe for a batch. It's like when you're cooking something. If you're going to make a cake, a specific cake, there's a difference between a coffee cake and there's a difference between a cinnamon cake. There's, there's a billion different types of cakes you can make. Well, there's a billion types of paint you can make. And depending on what the paint is going to be used for is the type of chemicals that go into paint, because this is where chemistry starts to get into play. In the early days, paint was just something that laid on something, it might stain it, but most of the time the paint can come off easily. Nowadays, paint is made to bond to something on a molecular structure. So you ever strip a plastic model
I
and,
have.
and there's still that haze that doesn't come out perfectly clean. It's still got like a color to it, but it's more acceptable to paint over the top. It's not a solid color, but there's that hint,
Yeah.
that tinge. That's because the chemicals used to make that paint, they made it to bond. And so it bonds to plastic. Now that same paint may not bond to aluminum or steel. Then you have your general purpose paints that use a wide range of different ingredients to make them react better to either bond. I mean, some paints are made not to bond. Some paints are made to be able to be taken off at a later time or to wear and be replaced. And, you know, when I said not all paints are created equal, a good example is Rust-Oleum. And Rust-Oleum is a fine, outstanding product, okay? And you get the 3X kind or whatever, and it's made for wood, plastic, metal, and all that stuff. And it adheres to that, for the most part, pretty well until it gets old. You know, and then it will start peeling off for plastic chairs that you painted, or it will start fading. So if you take a plastic chair and you paint it with a Rust-Oleum color, and you take two chairs and you paint them the same way, you put one in the house and one outside on the porch, in a year the one outside on the porch is not going to look anything like the one you kept in your house, because it's not made to handle the sun. It's not made really to handle the rain. It's a temporary solution for a project, because most people, everything that we do is temporary and throwaway. So paint has gone a lot in that route. But then you get Rust-Oleum, the same company, they'll make coatings, or they'll call it implement paint.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's made to spray on things that are outside in the weather. And that stuff is hardcore. But then if you take that same stuff and spray it on a model car, it just doesn't come out good. It looks terrible. But it looks good on that tractor. But it won't look good on a plastic model. Now, if you use the generic, basic, all-purpose Rust-Oleum on a plastic model, you don't have to worry about weather and fading, because most of the time once you build it, that's your baby, you want to protect it. And you put it somewhere where it's not in the sun, it's not in the weather, and that paint for the most part will stay wonderful on that car forever. But the issue, and we'll get to the issues now that people have with paint, you know, paint has a flash point. All the everything in that paint that makes it a liquid, or so it can be turned into an aerosol, or even if it's brushed, it has a flash point, meaning it evaporates at a certain rate. Okay, and not all paint will evaporate at the same rate. So you can take the same paint, you can paint in it whatever you're painting, and you can come back and look at it in 2 hours and go, wow, I missed a spot. And you go to paint over it again with the same exact can, and you notice it crazes, it does weird things, it doesn't go on, it looks terrible. And that's because the paint that is on the model is no longer the same paint that's in the can. It is flashed off. It's evaporated a lot of the chemicals inside of it. So now you're putting something different over it, and then they don't cohere right, and they just, it's like putting drops of oil in water. They just fight each other, you know, on a molecular basis, on a chemical basis, and you get that crazed look. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So then
I've done that mistake. I know.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, you think this paint's crap, you know, your technique was wrong. And it's hard to, you know, you can watch a million YouTube videos. You can watch my video. That doesn't mean you're going to figure it out. The only way you can figure it out is to try it yourself, or better yet, sit next to somebody who's had that experience. Back in the day, we would have a handful of guys meet up at somebody's house, your model car club, and we'd all build together in the same room. You'd have 5 guys building a model car, and if there was an issue, guys, yeah, here, I'll help you. This is what you're doing wrong, and you would learn. And now we don't have that. It's hard to learn off of the internet. I mean, it's great. I've learned a lot of things on the internet, but there's those little touches and techniques you can't catch. You can't watch a video and he may have done something, or she may have done something. I should say they, but they may have done something that you didn't notice or see on the video, or they didn't add to the video. That changes the whole thing. So if you want to paint a model car or a model or whatever you're painting, I mean, even if you're painting that plastic chair to put on your porch, you have your 3 stages. You do your light coat to get all the hard spots, and then you go over it. But you stay within a 15-minute window of each coat. You want to wait a little bit for the paint to get tacky, but if you wait longer than 15 minutes before you put another coat on, you're asking for trouble. And so if you use this paint and you buy that wet look clear, that clear paint, right? You can clear over this when it's still wet. You just can't wait more than 15 minutes. Okay, but then you also run the risk, if you put too much clear on, you can actually run the color. You can make the paint underneath change or run.
So wait.
Mm-hmm.
Back up a second. What do you mean you can put, when that's wet, you can put the clear on top of it?
So if you take this paint and you paint your model,
okay,
and you're done painting it, you got it the way you want it, you wait 15 minutes and you go over with the clear light coat first, wait 15 minutes, and then another coat, and then you do however many coats with your a good window in between to make sure it stays tacky. And the time frames change depending on your conditions where you live. If you live in the desert and it's 120 degrees and it's super arid, you may not have 15 minutes. You might have to, within 5 minutes, go over it. But you can actually, because it's been done quite a few times by many people on 24-hour builds, to where you paint it, and before it's completely dry, you go over it with a clear. But you have to do it within a certain time frame, or it's going to craze. Now, if you go past that window, you literally got to let that car set from, depending on when you're at, 3 to 7 days before you can clear it. Because you have to let the original colorant, the original paint, completely flash off, completely dry before you start putting a clear on. So it's all about technique. If you're not familiar or you're not comfortable, paint your model, let it set for a week, paint it one weekend, let it dry really good, come back and clear coat it the next weekend. That's what I always tell people who's not too familiar with painting. But you can paint a model car or clear a car when it's still wet if you wait the right amount of time. Wait till that paint's tacky, and then do light coats so you don't get your runs. But you can. You can clear the same day that you paint. You just got to do it within a certain time frame, or you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Okay. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. And so it's the same with airbrushing. Now, the problem with painting with airbrushing, and in my last video I did with painting, you can see me having the exact problem. So I like to paint with metallic paints. Metallic paint is cool on a model. Mm-hmm. Now, the fact is that the metallic in paint is made to it's made in different sizes. Metallic is an aluminum oxide, or it's aluminum flake that's very small, but you can get it very, very big too, depending on what you're doing. the issue that arises is that when most airbrushes that you can buy or that people wind up buying, the needle size is too small to paint a model with metallic paint. And if you use most airbrushes, they come as a 0.03, and they're okay for regular paint, paint made for an airbrush. But then when you start getting into automotive paints or metallic paints, that needle size is not big enough. And then for me, I paint mostly with craft acrylic paint because it's more forgiving when you make a mistake and you clean off the paint before you clear it. But some craft acrylic paints, the pigment is how can I put it? The pigment is too large, and so it will have a hard time going through an airbrush if you use a small airbrush. So it's all on what you plan on doing. I mean, if you want to be safe and know that the paint's going to come out, buy a rattle can, because a rattle can needle is, or the end of a rattle can is almost a size 1, where most of the guys who paint model cars with airbrushes using metallic paints or automotive paint will use a 5 or bigger, a 0.05, which is half a 1 or a 0.5, but
yeah,
it's all in. That's why I like to use spoons, and that doesn't always work for me because I've painted a spoon and it comes out awesome, and then I go to try to hit the model and I just start having all kinds of problems with the combination of the paint and the pigment size and the metallic size, and it could be a pain.
But I mean, the spoons are great for at least for what I've found when I go to test other stuff. Find out what colors come out.
Yeah. Well, so
right? Like, I mean, just changing the primer sometimes can totally change the tone.
Yeah. Well, so here's 2 spoons, and they're 2 different colors.
Yeah.
And these 2 spoons, not only have they been painted with a craft acrylic, but they've been cleared with actually I didn't use the same clear. I used a floor polish to clear this because I just wanted the idea of what it would look like and how well it took to curves. And this is not with primer, because I don't like to use primer if my subject is molded in white and the body is clean, it doesn't have a lot of body work, because it comes out smoother. But you see those 2 colors, that's what this is. That's the same 2 colors on an actual kit. And I don't know if you can see it, but right where the door handle is, just down from it and to the left, is a huge goober where I had to touch it up. Man, you can have a perfect paint job and mess it up in a second, can't you? So that's an example of trying to touch up a mess up. But, I did use a different clear on this. I used, here's an example of using different types of paints. So it was a craft acrylic, okay, with a lacquer clear. Now, before I put a lacquered clear on the acrylic was completely dry. You can wait like an hour and it'll be dry enough, but I like to wait a day, and then I come back and I smooth out the body. I don't put any chemicals or stuff on there or water because it'll take the color right off. I usually take a very clean diaper and just rub the paint to get it smooth, and then you could clear it with a lacquer clear. Or if you want to stick to a water base, you can use something else, that's water based, like a floor polish. But that's another thing is like, people like to use floor polish for clearing things. It's great, but again, you have to think about what that floor polish was meant to be. There's a reason why they don't call it a paint or a clear coat. They call it a floor polish. Essentially, it is a paint. It is a clear coat. So when your wife uses that on her linoleum floor, she's actually painting her floor with a clear, that dries really fast. And floor polish is super, I mean, it's like the miracle thing. It's, it settles and it dries even no matter how thick you put it on. It doesn't run unless you really mess up. But the problem with it is that it is not UV resistant.
Yeah.
So if you paint a model car or clear a model car with it, and at one point in time or another you put it inside a window or near a window and the sun hits it, you will notice the clear coat will start to yellow because the UV is affecting that clear coat. So,
okay, so wait. So what I don't know if this is necessarily true, right? So, but if you put it on like a darker color, it wouldn't yellow, right? Or is it still going to?
It will yellow. You won't notice it as yellow, but you'll notice that the paint color isn't quite what it originally was. It may look kind of hazy or not as nice, but that's not always the case. You can use a clear coat. You can use a see, I can't even think. My brain ain't working. You could use a floor polish, and if you keep it out of, UV light, it's not going to change on you. But even a real, even not so much today, but there was a time you could, get you could paint your own car and clear it, real car, and after 2 or 3 years, that it starts to get a weird tint to it. That's because the clear coat was junk. It was cheap, or it may have been thinned too much, and it didn't have that UV protection, and it would literally change the color of the clear coat, and sometimes even change the paint. When you see these cars, people, do car repairs, or a shop will do a car repair, and then 2 years later, it's peeling off and it looks terrible. It's because they prepped their clear coat wrong. They thinned it too much to make it go on smooth and easy and quick and to use less. And it's okay until a few years later, it starts to peel off and look terrible. So yeah, a lot of things have to do with your prep and how you do things. But so paint, when it's made the way I used to make it, and I can't tell you what's in it because it's actually a trade secret. I can go to jail if I tell you what is inside the exact chemicals.
That's why I thought we wouldn't say the company name either.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into it a little bit later, but a lot of your paint companies now are owned by the same businessmen. So the way paint is made, we had these huge vats, or tanks, and only a foot of that tank would be sticking from the bottom of the floor. So you'd look on the floor and you'd see just the top half of the tank, the top foot, and there was a huge opening, and then there was a big mixer, like a huge drive shaft that went down the center with a massive blade on the inside. And we would put in whatever solvent, and we called it solvent. It wasn't a thinner, it was a solvent, and there were many different types of solvent, and what solvent we used was based on what type of paint it would eventually become. And so we put so much solvent in there, and while the blade was turning at a specific RPM, because it changed, because heat and all that really affects how paint is made. But we would take these bags of pigment, and we would put in that little hole. We would just dump the pigment, not the bag. The bag we would throw away. But most of the time, there's a few times the bag went into the tank. That's a pain. But we would, you would put the pigment in at a certain rate, because if you dump too much at one time, then it's like it's not going to mix. Kind of like when you take cold coffee and you put creamer on top, it turns into like little chunks, you know? So no matter how much you mix it, you have to heat the coffee up. And so a lot of times the heat of the blade rotating, mixing it, we have to make sure we get it mixed to a certain temperature. Like we had some thermometers in there to tell us how hot the product was inside the tank, and we'd have to keep mixing it until it reached a specific temperature and stayed there for a certain amount of time. Or the opposite, we could not let it get to a certain temperature, because then it changed the chemical properties and it wouldn't be what we were trying to make. So once we got all this pigment mixed inside, or with this all the chemicals, because for example, if we were making a water-based where we would actually use water instead of a solvent, we would also put I don't know what you'd call it, an insecticide or herbicide, so that you wouldn't get mold growing in there. So for those of you who think that craft acrylic paint is safe, we do put poison in it to keep it from growing, those microorganisms that would eat the pigment and change the color of the pigment. So even though you think it's craft acrylic and there's no chemicals in it, there's stuff in there that's not safe. So no matter what you use to paint, unless you're hand brushing stuff, but if you're airbrushing, I don't care what kind of paint it is, you should always wear a mask, a respirator, because you don't want that junk in your lungs. Heck, if I wear a mask when I mow the lawn, you don't want any of that. But back to what I was saying, we would mix the paint, and so the bottom of the tank would be on the next floor. So we'd start on the 4th floor, putting the pigment in with the solvent. Then we would go down to the 3rd floor, and we'd have the bottom of the tank with a big ball valve. And we had milling machines. And an interesting tidbit, and I could say this because the factory now that I worked at not only has closed, but they tore the building down and got rid of all the stuff. Our milling machines originally came from Hershey's chocolate company in Pennsylvania. So when they got new milling machines and decided that they would make, they sold them to us, and they went from making chocolate bars to making paint. But they would go through this mill, and inside the mill they'd have this like media, like for lack of a better term, like sandblasting media, although it's not sandblasting media, but it's like little, and it would just turn it and turn it and turn it and get the heat up, and it would break down the pigment even more, and chemically it would make the solvents and whatever other chemicals in there form into it to make the more liquid, or the basis for making paint, the coloring. And then it would come out of there into what we called the letdown tank, and that tank was basically we would take samples to make sure it was what it was supposed to be, and not just its consistency, but the color spectrum range, and also if it stuck or applied the way it was meant to be. And then we would make ads or whatever, and then we put it 55-gallon drums. So that's basically how we made paint. But the chemicals that we used to make the paint had a huge range. So my suggestion is when you paint something, use the same products. Don't be switching back and forth too much unless it's tried and true, and that that it'll work. Because a lot of times one paint company's paint is made to where it will have an adverse reaction to another company's paint, simply so that you can't buy this color red in a shaker can and then go over here and find that same red cheaper, and then you mix the two, and then it does all kinds of crazy stuff, because they're made from different compounds and different chemicals, and they will actually have an adverse reaction. So it's always best to stick with the same brands. Try to, if you paint with testers, it's best to use a Testors Clear, although you can get away with other stuff. But You know, paint is a very tricky thing in how it's made. I mean, I could be for days talking about the little idiosyncrasies of paint and what it does, but and then its differences. You just got to understand what that paint was designed for. You know, I mentioned I like to paint with cracked acrylic paint. It really wasn't designed to be painting model cars, but playing around with it, experimenting with it, you know, I found the technique to where you can get really awesome, results with it. But that doesn't mean I could take an acrylic clear and go over to enamel. You know, an enamel is an oil-based paint. You know, a lacquer paint is more of a chemical-based paint. An acrylic is a water-based paint. And now we're getting where modern paints is a cross between an acrylic and lacquer, if that makes sense to you, because it's more eco-friendly. You know, and the chemicals that we're using now are not as hot or as poisonous to the environment. You know, like you don't find lead in most paints. In fact, if a paint, there's a few that still use lead, but it's for special use and it's a very controlled substance. A good example is your speedometer. The what goes into making that orange paint on your speedometer,
Yeah.
you know, is very much controlled, you know, and there's still lead in that because lead has that creamy effect and it's able to, you know, where you can't use lead on most anything else. But they figure that a speedometer needle is inside of the housing and people can't just touch or lick it.
Yeah. No. Yeah. No. I mean, it's crazy how non-dangerous people think paint is, but if they actually really looked into it,
well,
a lot of that stuff could kill you.
A simple comparison. I explained that most paint comes from some sort of pigment that's natural based. So in the springtime, when the dogwoods are in bloom or whatever flowers you have there, and you have allergies and you go outside, you start having a reaction, the pollen's in your sinuses, your nose start running, your eyes start running. You can even get sick just by walking outside, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, for those who have allergies know what I'm talking about. All right. And that's just stuff and sometimes you can see the pollen in the air. You see it on your car. Now, a lot of paint, a lot of the pigment comes from pollen from plants. All right.
Yeah.
So
I work in a lumber mill, so that I deal with that a lot. Yeah.
But something natural can cause you so much grief. There's people who's had to go to the hospital for respiratory failure because the pollen, I don't know what they call it, is too high outside. So now you get a paint, even if it's water-based and all that stuff, it's still a foreign substance in your lungs.
Yeah.
You might be able to lick it and eat it. That doesn't mean it's safe to inhale. Nothing is, I mean, you smoke cigarettes and that's just smoke, you know, what is that going to do? Well, we know it causes cancer and can kill you, you know, but it's not just paint we have to think about as a hobbyist when we make stuff. So I like to build resin models or work with resin. A lot of people like that 3D printing, whether it's the resin or the old plastic, whatever they call it, filament.
Yeah.
You know, you have to sand on it and get all that stuff smooth, you know, to get it right. Well, all that dust and powder, if you're over here, and if you're like me and you're standing on grandpa here, you know, and you got that sandpaper and you got to take your glasses off because you're old and you're trying to sand stuff, you know, you're breathing in all that resin crap that's now being made into a dust by your sandpaper. And let me tell you, I wear a mask now because there's a few times I couldn't sleep because I felt it in me and I didn't feel well. And it was just from standing on something resin. And I'm sure there's listeners that'll say, yeah, you big dummy, you should have known better than that. But even if you're into woodworking and you're sawing stuff, you're supposed to wear a mask. I mean, it's a very simple thought. It doesn't take a genius to realize anything that goes into your sinuses, your mouth, into your body may not be healthy for you, especially if it's not meant to go into your body.
Yeah.
Your body isn't designed to intake a lot of stuff. It's designed to help filter out things. But, even your lungs, takes things out of your system. But if you're painting something, you're overwhelming what your body is naturally meant to do. I mean, if nature can overwhelm your body with pollen and get your sinuses going and make you sick,
No, I try to do those safety tips too while we talk about products, because there's a lot of these products that can totally mess you up if you're not respecting it.
We're all guilty. I've seen guys on video where he's got his trash can there between his legs and his airbrush, and he's airbrushing into the trash can without a mask on, just talking away, and you're like, hey dude, you see that cloud coming up around you? You're breathing that in. And I'm not gonna lie to you, there's times I just need to touch this up real quick with the airbrush. It's just not that much, and then my nose, and I'm like, oh man. Or you blow your nose and you get like a bluish color or whatever paint you're painting, because the stuff is gone in. Even if you think it's safe, it's not really safe. It's like trying to run a mile in a dust storm.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is crazy.
So safety in modeling is very important. And I talk about paint, but it's everything in modeling where you may create some sort of dust. I've heard people in some of your other interviews talk about using a Dremel, and you want to talk about something that can kick up some dust that you breathe in. I mean, if you use a Dremel to get that thing just the way you want it, put a mask on, even one of these little COVID masks or something, just something to keep all that out of your sinuses. Safety is so important.
So I do kind of have a heart out today. And we're hitting to the end of the time.
Yeah, we got 3 minutes.
Did you have any questions for me?
I probably would have, but I've watched all the videos that you've done with everybody on interviews, so it's kind of hard to ask a question that hasn't been asked already. I was surprised that you got a hold of me and asked if I wanted to do an interview. I haven't done a lot of videos on my YouTube channel, and I've had a few people come up at model car shows asking me what's going on, why I haven't done videos, and I guess I'm just lazy. It's hard for me to do a video and build at the same time, or I get so engrossed in building and doing what I'm doing that I don't think about doing a video. I've got videos where I started a project and I finished it, but I don't have a finish up video. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I should just do a video where I show it built. So yeah, well, I skipped a whole bunch of stuff, but here's the built car,
Well, and I mean, there's a lot of people in the hobby, and I don't mean this as a negative thing, but you have a lot of knowledge because of what the stash is behind you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
also used to do something like, I mean, making paint's not exactly.
Yeah,
a lot of people don't know about that, and I thought that's why this would be a good show.
And understanding, and I hate to say it, but trying to explain why paint reacts and what it does, that's almost a college course. I mean, I could spend a week.
No, you're right. You're right.
Minutes a day for a week explaining, what paint really is and how it. I don't even know if they did How It's Made TV show on the History Channel about it, because it's just that there's so much into making paint. It's amazing. And
and there's the other thing, like, I mean, all that stuff's patent, so there's a lot of that stuff they really can't go into on those shows.
Yeah,
paint.
I don't want to get your show too far past your allotted amount of time. But one thing that concerns me about your paint manufacturers today, and it's something I've noticed, believe it or not, when I drove a truck, that a lot of businesses have this wild idea of buying out other businesses.
Yeah.
And so a business will sell out because they're not doing so hot and they want to hurry up and cut it out while they can. And so they get bought out. Well, you know, a lot of your paint companies are being bought out and are under the same ownership. So Rust-Oleum owns Testers. Testers has always been a modeling paint, nothing else. Testers has been a hobby business Testers started out by hobbyists making hobby stuff, whether it was little gas motors for airplanes, whatever, or paint. Everything was designed around the hobby. Rust-Oleum could care less about model cars. Model car paint doesn't fit their sales plan. So if you've noticed, and people like to blame it on COVID, but you don't see a whole lot of the hobby paint like you used to. You can go to the places like, Hobby Lobby, for example. You had a huge selection of Testers paints. Now you go there and it's slim to none because their focus is not on model paint. That's not their niche. Their niche is on home improvement and industrial paints, industrial coatings we'd never even hear about because we don't have a manufacturing plant making whatever. But so I get worried when I see that things are not really going in the way of the hobbyist. And that's one of the reasons why I've switched or trying to learn more about craft acrylic paints, because it's a cheap paint to make. That's why it's so cheap, and it'll always be around and be affordable. So that's
but that's why every miniature manufacturer now has their own acrylic paint line, because it's like literally you can go to Citadel, Army Painter, Vallejo. I mean, you just keep going, and it's like, how many different ways can you make ultramarine blue? And it's nowhere near the same color from every manufacturer.
For all those purists out there, forgive me, but you're wasting your money when you buy a 1/4 ounce of paint in a jar like this for $6. That is ridiculous. I mean, I know I don't build a lot of figures or paint a lot of figures. I do, but there's no way I would be able to afford Citadel paints and all that. It's just you had an individual who's really good at painting figures on your show. He moved back and he waved his arm back, and you could see he had enough paint in the background to have his own paint shop to sell stuff. I mean, thousands of paints, and I'm thinking, $6 each, or roughly that. That's a lot of money in little paints. And so, I'm kind of tight. I don't want to spend a lot of money. So if I see where I can buy, a thing of craft acrylic paint for 85 cents, a jar this size, I'm better off than.
Yeah, I have that same problem, dude.
Yeah. So those manufacturers, I call it keystoning. If you know anything about business, they're making a huge profit off people buying these little tiny paints. They probably got less than a penny. They got more money in that plastic container than the paint inside, and they're just making a ton of money off of hobbyists. It's sad.
But the problem is, like, the craft acrylic paint, when it comes to the figure painting, it's just too thick.
Yeah, well,
you've just totally thinned it all out. Because like that bottle you just showed, if you thin that down to where it's the same consistency as it doesn't work the same. Will not even be the same color.
Yeah. So this color here, this paint here, this color.
Oh, wait. Sorry. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Okay, so this paint here, this,
Oh, yeah.
this color.
I think I even have that color.
Okay, this is what it looks like on a plastic model car.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
and the paint's good enough. It ended up in a magazine. The second to the last Scale Auto, this car was featured. It took up to, not featured, but it was in the magazine. It took 2 pages, representing a model car contest. But so, I guess if you have to have an exact perfect color, but it's not a new thing. I mean, you think, well, they just started this Humbrol, which is an excellent paint. You're spending $5 for an itty bitty metal jar, but they are exact color matches for specific military vehicles or aircraft or whatever. And so now you're getting Citadel and MiG paint or whatever, and they're the exact color of what's supposedly supposed to be for a fantasy vehicle. So I'm the kind of guy, I will use my artistic license and come close to the color. I'm not going to worry about making an exact match to something that is a fantasy vehicle. I mean, and I think a lot of those vehicles are cool. I like the Gundams, and I've painted a lot of trying to think of what it is. BattleTech. Do you remember BattleTech came out in the 90s, early 90s?
Yeah.
I painted a ton of those for people, and I'll be honest with you, I had a hard time because they really didn't have, or where I was at, I didn't see specialized paints for painting those, I'm sure they did. It's just where I was at, I didn't see them. But, if you're into it and you don't mind spending the money on that, do what you like to do and get what works best for you. But me being a tightwad, I have a hard time spending $6 on a small can. And some advice: if you use a can of paint to paint a model car, when you're done, throw it out, because there's not enough in here to paint another, and it's going to go bad in less than 2 years. You might as well just set it on a post and shoot it with your rifle so you can get the marble out of it or something. But I wouldn't suggest keeping spray cans of paint. And I say that I probably got 20 spray cans floating around. That's probably bad. But paint doesn't last. If you get a spray can, realize that if you don't use it all within 2 years, there's a good chance it's not going to be good. If you have a large project, whether you're doing a model car, you're painting your garden tractor out there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Paint is made in batches, okay? And there's a tolerance for the color when they make the batches. So if the manufacturer, when they make their paint, it's on the far left of the color spectrum of their tolerance, that batch, and you buy that shaker can and you paint your garden tractor, and then you realize that it's not enough paint, so you go and you go buy another can. Well, that batch was different. Those 2 spray cans weren't made at the same time. The batch is different. So their tolerance where they stopped is on the far right, so you was here before and now it's over here. And so when you paint something, they're 2 different shades. You're like, it's the same paint. It says it's the same color. It even says it's made for this specific Toro thing, but it's 2 different colors. Look, well, that's because paint's made in batches. So when you buy paint to paint whatever, make sure it's the same batch and you buy it at the same time so that you have enough.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
But anyway, James, thank you for coming on, man. I do got to get going.
All right.
I'm glad we were able to make this work today.
Well, how many people watch this? 3?
We've been consistent at 2 for the whole hour and a half.
That's us.
So no, that's not us. That's 2 people watching.
Yeah. Well,
it is what it
we're
is.
at work and doing things. So, as the week goes on, it'll get
no worries whatsoever, dude.
It's fun. Hopefully I didn't embarrass anybody or upset anybody, but
it's the internet. I mean, that's all I'm gonna say. It's the internet.
Well, I'm gonna plug something.
Go ahead.
Another Facebook group. If you build anything that's hobby related, plastic related, or whatever, I've had this Facebook group, and I think you're in it for several years now. I think 4 years. It's called the Model Builders Guild, and it's you have to be approved to get in, and it is moderated. It's rated PG. There's no politics and all that stuff. So, if you're interested in hanging out with or seeing a different thing, or not, because there's like 2,000 model building Facebook.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but this is one that's a private group. It's not public. So look up the Model Builders Guild, and I know you're on it, Joshua. You're on it. I keep wanting to call you Jason. I don't know why. I hate calling someone something other than what their name is. It's rude, but I have to stop and say Joshua. Which is a cool name, but why do I want to call you Jason? I don't know.
It's all right, dude. No worries.
But anyway, so check that out on Facebook if you guys want. You have to apply to get into the group, so we can keep out all those girls with the barely tops on and all that stuff. So it's just people who build model cars or model any who's into some sort of hobby that's plastic related or whatever. We try to keep out all the other weird political riffraff stuff, and religious stuff and whatever. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on, and I will talk to you in a couple minutes, okay?
Yeah. Well, also for those who end up watching this video, if you ever have any questions, you want to talk about something, you can find me on Facebook. On YouTube, I go by Mr. Darby, aka Mopar Modeler. You can reach me through there. If I don't answer right away, it's because I don't pay enough attention, and I might go a week without looking at my stuff or even looking at Facebook. So don't be offended. It's just that, I'm an old guy who really doesn't pay a lot of attention to that. But if you have any questions on paint, or if you're wondering if I might have something in my stash, just shoot me a message somehow, and if you don't know how to get a hold of me, there's a lot of guys out there in the groups that actually do know me who can get a hold of me or tell you how. All right.
Later, dude. So that was James. We learned quite a bit. We learned a lot about him. That's for sure. And then how paint was made. I thought that would be a good topic. He worked for a company for, I guess, several years. But really awesome episode. I will see you guys next week. I think James Smith is next week. And I'm kind of curious to see how the hobby is down in his neck of the woods compared to some of the other places around the US, right? So I got to get going, but I will see you guys next week. Bye.